Greetings, viewers. Eric the Car Guy here. Back again with another show where I answer your questions live. I think this one is number 18, maybe? Not real sure. Anyway, yes, number 18. Anyway, a few things I want to cover first before we get started. First of all, thank you for watching. This is a show where I answer your questions and butcher your names, and I apologize if I do so. I try, but there's some sort of mental block with me reading names, whatever. But I apologize for that in advance. I also, if you're watching this on YouTube, I cannot see those comments that you're posting on YouTube, so the questions that you post there will not be answered because I cannot see them. Also, that's going to go live after the show is over, so I'm not going to be able to answer those YouTube questions, and I apologize for that. Also, questions posted after this event is concluded will also not be answered, so if you're posting questions to the event after it is already done, those won't be answered either. So, in order to answer those questions that you might have if you missed the show or if I missed your question during the show, you can always go to EricTheCarGuy.com. There's a welcome video there to describe all the features we have to help you with your automotive questions, and that's where I personally go to answer questions. So if you're looking for answers to your automotive questions, that's where I ask that you go. In those instances, like I said, if I don't get to them during the show, and also, I'm only going to be answering automotive questions during the show, so if you have questions like, hey, Eric, what kind of pizza do you like, that kind of thing, I'm not going to be answering those questions. I'm just going to try to stick to automotive because that's what the show is about. I'm not going to try to take up any more of your time describing all of this stuff. I'm actually going to get to those questions now. One last thing I want to mention, I was unable to change the settings on the camera. Usually I can lock the focus off, but for whatever reason I wasn't able to do that, so sorry if the focus is going in and out. I'll try not to move too much so that it does its thing. But anyway, let's just jump right in and get started with your questions that are posted to this Google Plus event. All right. Okay, Lee Wilson. Hi, Eric. What could be causing an oil burning smell from my rear diff? I'm going to say a couple of things. Perhaps you have a bad bearing. Maybe you even have overheating brakes. Like, say, for instance, there's some sort of brake problem. If the brakes are getting too hot, they can, quote-unquote, cook the oil. What I'm thinking is, actually, along with that, if the axle seal is going and the friction material, whether you have drums, most likely this would happen if you had drum brakes, but if the friction material is going, and, well, if the axle seal is going and it contaminates the friction material, whenever you apply the brakes, you might get that burning oil smell. I think in your case it's time to go back there and have a look at what's going on, because other than that, I mean, usually if it's got no oil in it, you won't necessarily get an oil smell, but if you are getting an oil smell from back there, the two things that I can think of, brakes make heat, and if you've got an oil leak into those brakes, it's quite possible that's where it's coming from. So that's where I would direct my search in your particular case. Let's see. I'm just going to try to randomly go through here. David Roderick has a 1994 Mustang GT 5-liter, 137,000 miles. Latest, after checking a number of things out, cleaning ground connections and working on more vacuum lines, took the car out after warm-up, did full throttle acceleration from a stop, shifting when I got to about 4K. Got some blue smoke. So slowed down and then did hard but not full throttle acceleration and no blue smoke. Oil level is fine. Is it time to consider a compression test? When I got the car, some engine oil in cold air intake, cleaned it and did not see anything return, but have not had it apart since the blue smoke. I'll probably check that again. Any ideas? Nothing more than blue smoke. Running pretty good. Exhaust system seems clear, but not ready to do full throttle again. Getting a 172 code from Right Bank 02, the only code. Okay, that's interesting. Blue smoke is burning oil. That's what it is. When you burn water or whatever, that smoke is usually white. Whenever you're burning oil, it's blue smoke. Under hard acceleration, that says most likely compression is sneaking past or oil is sneaking past the rings and into the combustion chamber. At 137,000 miles, that's a couple of miles on the vehicle, that wouldn't necessarily be uncommon, particularly under full throttle acceleration when cylinder pressures are highest. In other words, your engine is working as hard as it can, and any weakness in any of those seals, such as the rings or the cylinder walls or anything like that, would show up under full throttle acceleration. As far as it being time for a compression test, well, you can run a compression test. It's not going to hurt, and plus it might be fun. But what I would do is I'd just take a look at the plugs. If you have sort of a brownish white, crusty buildup on those plugs, or pull the plugs out per cylinder, and the cylinders that you find with that type of buildup are the cylinders that are consuming oil. You don't necessarily need a compression test to point that out. It's usually the plugs show the evidence. Also, the fact that you had oil in the intake usually means that excessive quote-unquote blow-by has gotten into the intake system. So it was actually able to overcome the PCV system and got into the intake. Not uncommon for a vehicle that's starting to get, or an engine I should say, it's starting to get a little loose. So I'm going to say it's probably not the end of the world. However, you have this P0172 code, which I believe is that it's too rich. And that could be a result of the oil. It's picking up the oil and seeing that as rich. So you might have one particular cylinder that's got an issue on that right bank. So I would pull the plugs, take a look, and look for that brown crusty buildup that I spoke of. Or sometimes the plugs are even wet with oil. Sometimes. But if it's oil being consumed during the process of combustion, it usually leaves sort of a brownish, whitish, chalky crust on the spark plug. If you see that, that's usually a good indication that that's the cylinder that's the problem cylinder. So the more of it that you see, the bigger the problem. So that's where I would take that as far as that goes. And like I said, that could also contribute to that rich code that you're having on that side. So I'd be looking on the right bank and pulling those plugs and taking a look. And you could go so far as doing the compression test, but really the compression test is just going to tell you what you already know from what the plugs told you. The real way to go is, I think, with a leak down test. It tells you so much more. It tells you whether the leak is going towards the bottom of the engine or towards the top of the engine. I've done videos on this that you can check out. There's a leak down test video. There's also a compression test video that you can watch. Both of those things should give you a general idea of how to go about that testing. But mostly what you're looking for is a high percentage of leakage, which, in my opinion, would show up based on how much of that buildup I talked about that you might find on those plugs. So that's where I'd be looking at that. So you're probably burning oil because your engine's getting a little worn. It's got some miles on it. It's a performance car. It's probably driven in a spirited manner. So it's not uncommon to be where you're at. And it may not be the end of the world unless you have emissions testing where you are. That rich code's gonna affect that, but it will also affect performance to some degree. But I wish you luck with that issue. All right, now I'm going to spin the wheel here. Okay, Jason Lavelle. Hi, Eric. I have a 1995 Chevy 1500, and the transmission shifts fine if I'm light on the gas, or I let up for it to shift. I give it half the pedal, and it won't shift into the next gear. Do I need a trans flush? Would that help? It's a rebuilt transmission with only 300 miles on it, and once it holds a gear, it's fine. Okay, if it's a rebuilt transmission with only 300 miles on it, you need to take that back or consult whoever installed that transmission. If you installed it yourself, you need to contact the people who rebuilt the transmission. Also, if you installed it yourself, you probably should go over the work itself and see if everything's hooked up properly, particularly the linkage to the what's called the manual valve on the side of the transmission. It's basically the selector lever that you have. If that's not aligned properly, if that's slightly off, it won't be fully in gear. If it's not fully in gear, those pressures inside the transmission can't get to where they're supposed to go. It's interesting that when it's in gear, it stays in gear, but it's not getting into gear. So it's hard to say exactly what the issue is, but the fact that it was recently rebuilt could mean that there could be something with the rebuild itself or with the installation. Those are the two main suspects. In order to make that determination, like I say, if somebody else installed that for you, I would say take it back. If it was a transmission that you purchased from someplace, I would contact them and see if they have some kind of support for you, because at 300 miles, that's hardly any miles that you have on that transmission, and it should not fail within an amount of time. And if you got the transmission from someplace, I'm thinking it came with some kind of warranty, maybe at least 30 days, something, not really sure. If it was a rebuild, I would imagine it came with at least a year. So contact the people you got the transmission from or the people that installed it and have them deal with the problem is what I would do, because if not, you may be looking at something really expensive and you don't want to do that. And if you installed it yourself, definitely take a close look at your work and make sure it's there properly. Also check the fluid level, obviously, and the fluid condition. So that's the direction I would take it. I would try to make that not my problem is what I would do, because Automatic transmission problems can get quite expensive. Okay, let's see. We have Davin Yap. Dear Eric the Car Guy, my rear wheel seems to produce this metal rattling sound each time I drive across a bumpy road. Any suggestions to what it might be? From your fan, spinning at 4,000 RPM. Cool, Davin. All right, well, rattling noises. I've actually got a video out on this, on how to find noises in the suspension, and just to do a recap on it. One of the things you might want to do is obviously lift up the vehicle in the area that's suspected. In this case, you're saying it's in the rear. You might want to lift up both rear wheels. Sometimes what I do is I get a large hammer and I actually hit the wheels while they're off the ground, and that many times will produce the same rattle that you hear while you're driving over bumps, and it makes it a little bit easier to find. Some rattles are harder to find than others, so if you hear the rattle but you can't necessarily pinpoint it with your ear, obviously, have this thing up on jack stands and securely lifted, okay? And chalk the front wheels to make sure it doesn't roll either, because you won't be able to use the parking brake with the rear off the ground. Anyway, getting back to this. If you can't necessarily pinpoint it with your ears, sometimes what I do is I use my hands. So I'll hit it, I'll hit the wheel, and I might hear the noise over here on a control arm or something, and I'll hold that control arm, and if the noise goes away when I hold something, that is a pretty good indication that you found the part that's causing the problem. Also, take a good look at the brakes. I would take a look at the stabilizer links if you have them back there, depending upon what kind of vehicle you've got. I'm trying to think of what else rattles around. Lots of things rattle around. Sometimes control arm bushings go bad. Ball joints. If you've got tie rods back there, sometimes there's adjustable suspension parts. All kinds of things. I can't really say exactly what it is, but that video that I spoke of, I think it's How to Find Suspension Noises 101, something like that. That video outlines a lot of the procedures that I'm saying here. Also, just grab the wheels themselves at 12 and 6 o'clock and 3 and 9 o'clock and just sort of shake them back and forth, and if you feel any looseness there, that usually can help you pinpoint a noise like that. But I'm thinking you got something suspension related. I'm thinking maybe stabilizer, maybe something with the brakes. Check out that video. That'll probably help a great deal. Moving on. All right, spinning the wheel again. We've got, let's find a shorter one. Here's a good one. Adam Edwards. Greetings from Halifax, Nova Scotia. Hey, Canada. I was wondering if you know of any telltale signs of wheel misalignment. I hit a couple of real doozy potholes over the past couple of months, and I'm finding it hard to tell if my wheels are messed up. I can't tell if my car is pulling in any one direction. It just pulls wherever the ruts in the road are. I have a strong suspicion they may be misaligned by a little bit, and I have been doing my best to check the tires for uneven wear. But honestly, it's hard to tell on them since they are pretty well in line to be replaced after this summer. Okay, if you don't have it pulling in any one direction, well, to answer your question directly, mainly what you look for a vehicle that's misaligned is the tire wear. Tire wear tells all. If the tires are not sitting on the pavement correctly, they're going to wear funny. You might see more wear on an inside edge or an outside edge. There's also issues with tire pressure. They can also cause uneven tire wear. If it's underinflated, the edges wear a bit more. If it's overinflated, the center wears a bit more. But you just said that you're looking to replace the tires. And if you have no pulling or anything at this point, I would say you're probably okay. And basically what you're doing with the alignment is you're trying to protect your tires. You're also trying to make sure that the car tracks straight down the road. Yeah, I get it. But ultimately, you're also trying to keep the tires from wearing in an uneven manner. When you get these new tires, have them align it. That way you'll know for sure. Because really, unless you see uneven wear, there's no real way that I can think of to tell if something's out of line. And you might want to go there and do a suspension inspection similar to what I just described for the last question, where you sort of shake the wheel top and bottom after you jack it up off the ground and see if you feel any looseness or anything there. With alignments, though, you won't necessarily feel something that's loose. If things get bent, you won't see that, and it's very difficult to see that. In fact, I did a video about inspecting after collision damage that might be helpful to you. And even in that video, I say that very thing. I say, okay, well, it's almost impossible to tell a bent part sometimes, a bent control arm or something. I can say this, though. If you're going to hit a pothole, make sure the wheels are straight ahead. Try not to turn when you hit it. So if you're looking and sometimes sometimes you're driving down the road, you're about to hit something, keep the wheel straight ahead. The suspension is designed to work in a straight ahead manner. The minute you turn the wheels, you're stressing those components more when you hit that obstacle, whatever it is. So if you find yourself, and in Canada, you've got some pretty good winters up there, that type of thing. I'm sure you've got some severe potholes. Do it straight ahead. Keep the wheel straight. Just hit it straight on. I know it's counterintuitive, but as far as the suspension goes, the suspension will thank you. Also try to slow down. And I try to let off the brakes too. I just hang on for dear life and just hit it straight ahead. And sometimes you may pop a tire off a rim or something like that, but in a way, I feel that you'll do less damage with the wheels pointed straight ahead than you will if they're turned in one direction. So just a little hint for next time you run into something like this, try to make sure things are pointed straight ahead. As far as to answer your question, if a vehicle is misaligned, uneven tire wear is normally what you see. And when you get new tires, there's no better time to do a proper alignment, because if you try to align a vehicle with tires that are partially worn, it's not really going to come out as well as it does with brand new tires. Another thing about alignments is all of your suspension components have to be tight. You can't have any play at all. Like for an inspection, you can have, I think, many times up to a 1/4 inch of play in suspension parts, and that's considered okay. However, for an alignment, there's zero tolerance there if you want a proper alignment. So if you have any loose suspension parts, you want to address those before the alignment, before you get the tires and everything else. But align the car when you get your new tires, and you should be good to go. And if it's not pulling in either direction, you're probably fine. So have fun with that, Adam. All right, now moving on. All right, we have Eric Brunhammer. Oh, I'm sorry, didn't see the end. Brunhammer, sorry. I have a 1989 Chevy K1500 4x4 5-speed. Way cool. That sounds like fun. The input shaft bearing makes a lot of noise and seems to be getting worse. Is it worth pulling the transmission apart to change the bearing, or should I just try to find a good used transmission? Or is there anything I could do to prolong the inevitable? There is one thing you might try. GM's Synchromesh transmission fluid. It's like magic fluid. Sometimes like transmission in a bottle, transmission rebuild in a bottle. I've even used it on Honda transmissions, which I've often said only use Honda transmission fluid in Honda transmissions, but I tried a little experiment with my own car once. Had somewhat of an input shaft bearing noise. I put Synchromesh transmission fluid in, and in about a week, the noise was pretty much gone. It wasn't gone completely, but it was gone significantly from what I had before. So at that point, I was sold. So you might want to try a transmission fluid change with Synchromesh transmission fluid. Now, and that's going to set you back. Okay, transmission rebuild in a bottle doesn't come cheap, but it may be worth it in your case as far as pulling that transmission out, because with a four-wheel drive, it can be a little bit of work, working around the transfer case, that front axle, that kind of thing. Not the end of the world, but not a fun job either. It's also, I think, maybe a little bit more of a beefy transmission. I'm not exactly sure what it is in there, but I've taken four-wheel drive transmissions out before, let's just say, and it was fun. So if I could avoid it, I would. So try that transmission fluid change. Try Synchromesh and see what happens. Otherwise, if that doesn't work as far as rebuilding it, honestly, manual transmissions are very rebuildable in my experience. If you're having any difficulty shifting into any particular gear, if you want to address that at the same time while you've got the transmission out, it usually means the synchronizer is starting to go. And also, obviously, replace the clutch while you got it out. There's no better time to do that. So, yeah, Synchromesh. Give that a try. And if that works, great. And if it doesn't, I don't think you need to replace the transmission. If you're uncomfortable doing the work yourself, you might consider sending it off to a transmission shop to have them do the work and then do the R&R yourself. That could save you the labor of the removal and replacement of that transmission. So that's something to be considered also. But as far as do you need to junk the transmission and get another one? Yeah. But if you want to get one that's already rebuilt, you usually have to turn in your old transmission as a cord. And that may be the best option because those normally come with a warranty. Look for the biggest warranty you can get, and away you go. So you do have a few options, but I'd start with some Synchromesh and see what happens. Let's see. Matt Bono. He has, hi Eric, my 2005 Toyota Camry XLE has 149,000 miles on it. There is a delay in acceleration 100% of the time. Whether I'm going from a dead stop or in the highest gear, I press the accelerator and the engine revs, but it doesn't go until about a second later. It's worse when I slow down into first gear without completely stopping and then accelerate. I love the car, but this makes for a very jarring apply when it drives me crazy. You posted in a video of a test drive of a 2009 Acura TSX that experiencing the same thing. Is this acceleration delay actually engineered into these vehicles? Please explain. Thanks. Based on your description, I don't think it's quote-unquote engineered into the vehicle. And just to make the distinction about that TSX test drive that I did, that's something with an electronic throttle and the way they had that set up. And that was just something that sort of annoyed me. The manual transmissions didn't have that issue. So I just want to put that out there. And I got a lot of comments about that in that video. Now, getting to your problem, the delay, what you have is you have the engine revving up before you actually move forward. This says to me that you might possibly have a transmission issue. In order to further investigate that, I would first check the fluid, make sure on a level surface, and I believe with that you have to have the engine running. Check the fluid level and condition. Make sure also that the engine is warmed up when you do this, and then see what the fluid level is. And if you've got some air bubbles in that fluid, that could indicate some sort of aeration within the hydraulic system, and air is not compressible. And I've talked about this before. Automatic transmissions don't work when they have air in the system. They need to have fluid. Fluid is not compressible. It's hydraulic. It basically makes the transmission work. Air does not. That's the simplest way that I can put it. So you may have an issue with I don't know. Maybe the pressures inside the transmission aren't quite right, and it's really difficult to say. It could be an electronic issue. If you have any check engine lights with any transmission-related codes, great place to start once you're done with the fluid. Something you might try is to change the fluid and filter and see if the condition changes in some way. And I don't know about a 2005 Camry, whether that uses a specific type of fluid, but you might consider synthetic fluid. That may help. Synthetic fluids and automatic transmissions really do well, but you have to be careful because you have to make sure that the transmission that you're putting that fluid into is willing to accept it. Automatic transmissions these days sometimes have very specific fluid requirements, and going outside those boundaries can cause issues. So check with Toyota and see what they say about using synthetic fluid in that case, and that may help. But I'm thinking, based on your description here, that what you're looking at is some sort of transmission engagement problem, and since it happens in many different gears and not one specific gear, it's something that affects the overall operation of the transmission, which could mean low fluid, or it could mean incorrect fluid, or it could mean the fluid's old, or it could mean the filter's clogged. It's really difficult to say, and that's why I say check the fluid level and condition. If it's not looking good, want to do a fluid and filter change, if you can, use synthetic fluid. Give that a try. And you don't, I get asked this all the time, there's still a couple of quarts in the torque converter. Yes, there still is, but as long as you get the majority of the fluid out, you don't have to worry about the torque converter so much. As long as you get the majority of the fluid out, great. There is a way to get it all out, and I've done it with transmission flushing machines. They can get all the fluid out, and absolutely every bit of it out. But with something like this, not knowing whether you're going to be able to repair the problem with just a fluid change, if you're just taking a chance, I'm cool with just doing the fluid and filter with what you get out of the system. That's what I'm cool with. As far as actually flushing it, if you want to take it somewhere and have it flushed, give that a try. Hard to say. As far as putting additives in there to get it to fix it, once again, it's hard to say. You really have to know what the problem is. If there's some other mechanical problem that's the issue here, then putting additives in is not going to help that mechanical problem, most likely. Additives work in transmissions that are older, that are worn out. The seals are starting to leak a little bit. Those additives have conditioners in them that cause the seals maybe to swell up a little bit and seal a little better, and maybe it works a little better. But once mechanical things start to wear out, they're worn out, and any amount of additives that you dump in there really aren't going to do much. So with a grain of salt with that, but that's what I would start with. I'd be looking at the transmission for that problem. You might even want to take it to a transmission specialty shop that might be familiar with the issue. They may be able to provide more insight, but more importantly, they have the testing equipment. You test the pressures inside the transmission to determine whether or not it's operating correctly, and they would be able to know right off if the pressures were within spec or outside of spec. And if they're outside of spec, then that would indicate an internal mechanical failure, and it's time for that to come out. Plain and simple. So I hope that information helps you. And also, there's a Uh, an article that I wrote on my website about transmission issues, and I speak towards issues like that. Moving on. Let's see. All right, we got Michael Peterson. Hi, Eric. Really enjoy your videos. Here's my question. What could be wrong with my Buick LeSaber 1995 Custom? My Buick has an issue starting and cutting off and on real quick. The gas pump comes on, but sometimes it starts and just keeps going. Other times it cuts off after being pressurized. It has gotten worse. The engine light comes on, but then goes away. It's OBD1 compliant, but has an OBD2 port. It is very unpredictable at times. It will run once it's started, even passes an inspection. Thanks for your time. That check engine light is going to be your best clue. That is an older, as you said, an OBD1 system. I can't remember the exact pins that you can jump on that connector. I realize it looks like an OBD2 connector. In fact, General Motors was using that style of connector before OBD2, and it somehow got adopted for everybody. But there's 2 pins, and there's a link on my site to this in the forum. I've linked to it before. You'll probably be able to locate it during the search. But you jump 2 of those ports on that connector, and that will cause the check engine light to flash, and you can interpret those as certain codes. That would be a great place to start with that, because sort of what you're describing, and I'm just taking a wild guess here based on GM experience, possibly crank sensor, something like that. A lot of times when people describe a situation like yours where the engine just cuts out or doesn't start or does weird stuff, a lot of times there's a crank sensor involved with that, but I don't want to commit to that. What I want to say is see what you can do, or just type in pulling GM OBD1 codes. Just do a Google search on that, and I'm pretty sure you'll get a page that'll come up that will show you what pins to jump in that connector, and it will also give you a listing of the codes that are interpreted from that. That's the way I would proceed with that, but don't hold me to that crank sensor thing. That's just a total guess. Pull the code, see what you got. That code is basically telling you, hey, I got a problem with this system. Do some investigation, and hopefully you'll find the answer to that problem from there. Young Han Shun, hi Eric, I have a 1999 Saturn SW2 that I treasure. It's a beater that has served me well through a lot. I love those kind of cars. I'm having an issue with a dragging caliper brake on the passenger side. I replaced the caliper with a rebuilt one and changed both flex hoses. I've bled both sides using the setup you use with your soda bottle and aquarium tube. The problem persists when it does. Brake pedal gets very firm, harder to push. I think the problem starts after the vehicle is warmed up or driven for a bit. Thanks for your assistance in advance. Interesting problem. You've done all the right things. You've replaced the suspected bad component. You also covered the brake hoses. But you're still having an issue there. I want to know if that wheel is hanging up when the brakes are not applied. And the way to do that is to lift up that side of the vehicle and try to rotate the wheel. Recently I did something, and you want to put it in neutral because it's front wheel drive to do this, or else you may have trouble if, well, let's put it this way, if the other side's on the ground and the vehicle's in park, so if your other wheel is on the ground, the vehicle's in park, and you try to turn the wheel, it's only going to turn a small amount. Chalk the rear wheels, jack up the one side, put it in neutral, then try to turn the wheel and see what happens. And if you notice some resistance there, then something is applying that brake beforehand. Now, the next place I would go is to the master cylinder. Now, I wouldn't disconnect the brake lines, but I would undo the fasteners that fasten it to the brake booster. And once I've done that, I'd go over and check the wheel again to see if it's spun. And if the wheel is spun freely, then I would say the problem is likely going to be not necessarily the master cylinder, but there's a push rod that connects the brake pedal to the back of the master cylinder. That may be misadjusted, or there may be a problem with the brake pedal height adjustment itself that's causing that. When I've run into problems like what you're describing before, it was usually some sort of mechanical issue like that. One other possibility is perhaps something in the ABS. I believe that car has ABS. And if it does have ABS, then that controls the proportioning of the system. In other words, it dictates how much pressure goes to the front and rear wheels. it also sends the fluid out to the front wheels and the back wheels and that type of thing. So it basically is sort of the gatekeeper, if you will, of the brake pressure in the system. So if there's a failure there inside the ABS unit, it could possibly contribute to a problem like this. But I would look towards the master cylinder first. And as I said, don't disconnect the brake lines from the master cylinder itself. Just undo the fasteners of the master cylinder to the brake booster, and you can actually pull it out a little bit. Those lines will bend a little bit just fine. You'll be okay. Don't step on the brake pedal. You don't have to, but just try that. And the other thing that sort of gives me a clue to this is if you have a problem with the brake booster itself, and there's something broken inside of that could also contribute to this. And you talk about a hard brake pedal. Usually a hard brake pedal means you don't have any assist. And the assist is provided by that brake booster. And if something breaks inside of that could contribute to it. So if something's broken inside there and sort of wedging inside of the back of the master cylinder, that could be causing it. I think the method that I just described, try to spin the wheel, undo the master cylinder, try to spin it again, that should at least get you in the ballpark of what your problem might be. So good luck with that. Next we got, we are out of time. We are actually out of time. So time flies when you're having fun, I suppose. If I didn't get to your question today, I apologize for that. But as I said, the place to go is EricTheCarGuy.com. Like I said, there's a welcome video there that can describe all the wonderful features we have. We've got a forum, we've got a search function, also the articles that I spoke of and mentioned in this. All those things are there to help you 24/7, 365. Once again, thank you for watching. And the questions posted after the event is over will not be answered, unfortunately. Same thing with YouTube. Go to the website. That's where I go. And also, the next show will be on May 14th. So if you missed this show or you didn't get your question answered during the show, there will be another one on May 14th. And I will announce that on my Google Plus and also my Facebook and Twitter. So speaking of which, if you wish to connect with me socially, you can find me at all those places. And I close each of my videos with, be safe, have fun, and stay dirty. And I will see you next time. Thanks again for watching.